My name is Patricia Walker, and I'm 68 years old. I live in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Glenwood, just outside of Portland, Oregon. Over the last 40 years, I've built a solid life from the ground up, managing properties, navigating the complexities of the real estate world, and making a name for myself in a field where many women, especially older women, are overlooked. My business, Walker Properties, has grown from a single duplex to over 300 rental units spread across several counties. I've seen it all, the highs and lows, the unexpected challenges, and the rewarding successes that come from sheer determination and hard work. But nothing could have prepared me for the events that unfolded one fateful evening. What I thought would be a simple family birthday gathering would soon turn into the most shocking betrayal of my life. So if you're watching, baby, go ahead and like this video, comment where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's story. 'Cause this ain't just my story, it's the story of too many women who had to smile through the silence. The night had started like any other, peaceful, uneventful, filled with the usual comforts of a family birthday party. I had been anticipating a quiet evening with my daughter, Rachel, and her husband, Ian. After years of building Walker Properties, I was used to the rhythms of family gatherings, even if the conversations often revolved around business. I'd earned every penny of my fortune, and I was proud of what I had built. But that evening, it all came crashing down. The table was set with fine food, elegant decor, and a sense of ease that I had grown accustomed to over the years. I was seated next to Rachel, who had her usual disarming smile on her face. The wine was rich, and the conversation flowed smoothly, just like the glasses in front of us. But something wasn't right. My grandson, Lucas, a 22-year-old college student studying business, had been unusually quiet during dinner. He usually sat back and absorbed the conversation, often offering insightful thoughts on the real estate industry, even though he was just starting his journey in the field. But tonight, he was distracted. His eyes kept darting around the room, and his hand kept fidgeting under the table. The evening was progressing slowly, like any typical family dinner, until I saw Lucas' face, a deep look of panic and fear etched in his features. I had known my grandson for his calm demeanor, his ability to remain composed in any situation. To see him this shaken was a jarring sight. Then, without a word, he grabbed my arm, his fingers trembling with intensity. "Grandma, we need to leave right now," he whispered urgently, his voice filled with a quiet desperation. I was taken aback. "What's wrong, Lucas?" I whispered back, unsure of what was happening. "Please," he urged, his grip tightening. "Just trust me." Confusion flooded my mind. We had just begun to enjoy the evening. The food was delicious, the wine exceptional, and Rachel seemed to be in high spirits. The conversation had turned to some recent property deals Rachel and Ian were involved in, and I had just started discussing a potential investment I was considering for Walker Properties. "Why do we need to leave?" I asked, glancing around at the table, where Rachel and Ian exchanged strange looks. It was the sort of glance parents share when they have something to hide, when they are in on something and you aren't. But Lucas wasn't waiting for an explanation. His eyes were wide with panic, and he practically dragged me toward the door, his footsteps quick and determined. "Lucas, please slow down," I said, struggling to keep up. "What's going on?" He didn't respond right away, and we reached the exit before I could say another word. As soon as we were outside, Lucas pulled me to the side of the building, away from prying eyes. "Grandma," he began, his voice trembling, "they're planning to take everything from you." I stopped dead in my tracks, trying to process his words. "What do you mean?" They've been planning this for months. They want to take control of Walker Properties. He paused and took a deep breath. I overheard them. They're going to drug you tonight, make you sign documents that you wouldn't sign if you were yourself. They've already set everything up. Lawyers, papers, everything. Shock hit me like a tidal wave. My own daughter, my flesh and blood, plotting against me? For money? For control? The disbelief was overwhelming. Are you sure? I asked, my voice barely audible. Lucas nodded. I heard them talking about it yesterday when I was home early from class. They think you won't figure it out. But I saw what they were planning. They know you're too strong to be pushed around. So they're going to use other means. The words hung in the air, and my mind raced with a million thoughts. Rachel, the daughter I had raised, the one who had always seemed so genuine, was planning to betray me. She and Ian were scheming behind my back, and Lucas was the only one who had seen through it. How could they be so cruel? How far were they willing to go? I stared at Lucas, trying to process what he had just told me. I knew my daughter and son-in-law were ambitious. Ian had always been a bit of a dreamer, always searching for the next big thing. But I had never imagined they would be willing to sacrifice family for personal gain. And to use their own mother as the victim of such a vile plot? It was beyond comprehension. I'll take care of this, I said, trying to calm myself. We need to make sure they don't get away with this. Lucas nodded, his face hardening with resolve. I'm not going to let them do this to you, Grandma. You've worked too hard. This isn't right. We stood in silence for a moment, both of us processing the gravity of what had just been revealed. The city lights flickered in the distance, and the quiet hum of the night seemed to mock the turmoil inside me. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, had been plotting to take everything from me. And the worst part was that she wasn't doing it because she was desperate. She was doing it because she thought she could get away with it. Lucas, I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. What do we do now? I already called a cab, Lucas said, pulling his phone from his pocket. We're getting out of here. I'll take you to the hospital. We need to get a blood test done. If they've drugged you, we need proof. The gravity of the situation settled over me like a heavy cloak. I had spent decades building this empire, and now, in one swift moment, everything I had worked for was at risk. But I wasn't about to let my daughter, or anyone else, take what was mine. As we climbed into the taxi, I looked back toward the restaurant. I knew I had to act fast. My mind was already running through the steps I needed to take to ensure I had legal protections in place. But first, I needed to make sure I wasn't under their control. I needed proof that what Lucas had said was true. The ride to the hospital felt long, the city streets blurred by the passing lights. My hands trembled in my lap, but I remained silent, my mind spinning with thoughts of what Rachel and Ian had done. They had set this entire trap up for me, and I had walked right into it. I couldn't believe I had been so blind. But the game wasn't over yet. I would fight back. The next few days were a blur, but my mind was laser-focused on what Lucas had told me that night outside the restaurant. Every part of me was still in shock. How could Rachel, my own daughter, betray me like this? I had always been there for her, supporting her through every decision, every setback. But now everything was tainted. I was no longer just her mother. I was a target, someone who had something she wanted, and she was willing to do anything to get it. The news that Rachel and Ian were scheming against me felt like a punch to the gut. But I couldn't afford to let emotions control my actions. I had spent my life building Walker Properties from the ground up, and I wasn't going to let anyone, especially family, tear it down. The first thing I did when I got home was call my lawyer, Marissa Clark. I had worked with her for years, and I knew she would be able to help me navigate through this legal mess. Patricia, what's going on? I haven't heard from you in weeks, she said after answering the phone. Marissa, I need your help, I said, my voice steady but filled with the underlying weight of the situation. Rachel and Ian, they're trying to steal everything I've built. They've been planning to manipulate me into signing documents that will transfer control of Walker Properties to them. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, followed by a low whistle. That's quite a claim, Patricia. Are you sure? I'm sure. My grandson overheard them talking. He's the only one who saw through it. They've already planned everything. They were going to drug me tonight. Make me sign the papers under duress. Marissa's tone became serious. We need to act quickly, Patricia. If they're trying to take control of your properties, we can stop them. But we need to document everything, and you need to stay one step ahead of them. I'm already ahead of them, I replied, determination filling my voice. I've called the hospital and set up a blood test. I need proof of the drugging. I'll have everything documented and ready. Good. Let me know when you have the results. In the meantime, I'll prepare a plan to protect your assets. We spoke for a little while longer, going over the steps I needed to take to ensure that my properties and my finances were safe. I was careful, making sure to avoid any mention of the impending betrayal to anyone other than Lucas and Marissa. I couldn't afford to let Rachel and Ian know that I was onto them, not yet. By the time I hung up, I felt a small sense of relief. At least I had a plan. But it was just the beginning. I knew that things were only going to get messier, and that's exactly what happened when I got the call from my neighbor, Mrs. Daniels, early the next morning. Patricia, you won't believe what I saw. A car parked outside your house last night, Mrs. Daniels said, her voice shaking with concern. It was a black sedan, and I noticed someone getting out of it. I think it was Ian. My stomach sank. I had been so focused on Rachel's betrayal that I hadn't considered that Ian might also be involved in this scheme. I had seen how manipulative he could be when it came to his business ventures, but I hadn't realized he was capable of something this sinister. Are you sure it was Ian? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm despite the rising panic inside me. I'm not sure. It was dark and I wasn't wearing my glasses, but I knew the car was his. It looked just like the one he drives. Thank you, Mrs. Daniels, I said quickly, trying not to sound too alarmed. I'll take care of it. I hung up the phone and immediately texted Lucas. Call me as soon as you can. We need to talk. When Lucas arrived, I could see the anxiety in his eyes. What's wrong, Grandma? You look worried. Rachel and Ian are getting more desperate. They're not just plotting to take control of Walker Properties, they're escalating things. Ian was spotted outside my house last night. I'm not sure what he was doing, but I'm guessing it's not good. Lucas didn't hesitate. He pulled out his phone and started typing quickly. We need to make sure they're not planning something else, something worse. I'll see what I can find out about Ian's movements. I'll dig into it. Good. We'll stick to the plan, but I want you to be careful, Lucas. If they find out I know, things could get ugly. He nodded. I'm not backing down. We'll make sure they face the consequences of what they've done. I admired his resolve. At his age, most people would have been overwhelmed by the weight of it all. But Lucas wasn't like most people. He had a strong sense of justice and a deep loyalty to those he loved, especially me. The next few days were filled with preparations. I spent hours in my home office with Marissa, reviewing all my financial documents, making sure that everything was in order and legally protected. I also contacted a private investigator to start looking into Rachel and Ian's activities. I needed to know just how far they were willing to go to take what was mine. I didn't want any surprises. Marissa worked tirelessly, making sure all my legal bases were covered. Meanwhile, Lucas was digging deeper into Ian's business dealings, looking for any signs that Ian was trying to pull money or make shady deals behind my back. Then, the worst possible thing happened. Rachel texted me. "Hi, Mom. I hope you're doing well. I wanted to talk to you about our conversation last week. I think we were too harsh. We really need to work together. I'm planning a family dinner for Ian's birthday tomorrow night at Riverside Grill. It's just a small get-together, but it would mean a lot if you could come." The tone of the message felt wrong. The sudden shift from hostility to sweetness made my skin crawl. It was too convenient, too sudden. They wanted to bring me back into the fold, to make me let my guard down. I wasn't falling for it. "I'll be there," I texted back, keeping my response short and to the point. I couldn't trust Rachel, not anymore. But I also knew that whatever they were planning, they wanted me there. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with thoughts of what might happen tomorrow. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that their plot had to be stopped before they could act. If I was going to protect everything I had worked for, I had to stay ahead of them. It was no longer just about business, it was about survival. I grabbed my phone and texted Lucas again. "We need to stay sharp tomorrow. Don't trust anything that seems too easy. This dinner might just be the beginning of their next move." That evening, I prepared carefully. I chose a simple but elegant outfit, nothing too flashy. The last thing I wanted was to look like someone who could be manipulated. I packed only the essentials: my phone, my keys, and a small purse. I left my checkbook at home, along with anything that could be used against me. I was ready for whatever came next. I wasn't going to let them steal what was rightfully mine. The day of Ian's birthday dinner arrived, and I could feel the weight of what was ahead pressing down on me. I had prepared myself for this moment for days, knowing that whatever Rachel and Ian had planned, it would all unfold tonight. I had come to the stark realization that family wasn't always about love and loyalty. Sometimes it was about power, control over what others valued most. In my case, that meant Walker Properties, the empire I had worked so hard to build. As I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my navy blue dress, I reminded myself why I had to go. If I stayed home, if I tried to avoid the situation, I would lose the upper hand. No, I couldn't let them dictate the terms of this confrontation. I had to stay composed. They would be expecting someone vulnerable, someone ready to be manipulated. They would not see me coming. I checked the time on my phone, 6:30 p.m. I would leave in 30 minutes, plenty of time to gather my thoughts. I could already picture the scene at Riverside Grill. It would be elegant, no doubt, the way Rachel always liked things. But I could also see through it, the opulence, the fancy wine, the carefully planned atmosphere. It was all designed to lull me into a false sense of security. I wasn't falling for it. At 7 p.m., I arrived at Riverside Grill. The moment I stepped inside, the ambience hit me. Warm lighting, soft music playing in the background, and the scent of expensive food filling the air. Rachel and Ian sat at a corner table, and as expected, there were more people than I had been led to believe. Not the intimate family dinner I had envisioned, but a large gathering, most of them strangers to me, people I didn't recognize. Rachel saw me the moment I entered. Her face broke into that practiced smile, the one that always made me question her sincerity. She rose from the table and walked over to me, arms open as if she were greeting a long-lost friend. "Mom, you look stunning," she said with a brightness that didn't reach her eyes. Her voice was saccharine sweet, the kind that made my skin crawl. "Thank you, Rachel," I said, forcing a smile. "Happy birthday to Ian." I glanced briefly at Ian, who gave me a stiff smile, his body language all but screaming discomfort. He had always been uncomfortable with me. Something about my success seemed to rub him the wrong way. I never understood it, but I didn't care to. The less I knew about his motivations, the better. "Mom, come sit with us," Rachel said, gesturing toward the table. I noticed that one of the guests, a man in an expensive suit, was already standing, extending his hand in greeting. "Mrs. Walker, it's a pleasure to finally meet you," the man said, his grip firm. "Ian's spoken highly of you. Your real estate empire is truly impressive." I shook his hand, feeling my discomfort grow. How did Ian's colleagues know so much about me? I wasn't just an acquaintance. These were people who seemed to have done their homework. I felt like a prize in a show ring, waiting for someone to bid for me. "Thank you," I said, my voice cool and polite. "It's a family business, built over many years." As I sat down, I felt Lucas' absence more keenly than I had expected. He should have been here, by my side, watching over me. I glanced around the table and realized that Lucas hadn't shown up. I tried to push the nagging worry aside, but it was hard to ignore. The dinner was a strange affair, full of pleasantries and overly rehearsed compliments. The conversation cycled back to real estate, a topic I knew well. Too well. It felt like they were trying to draw me into discussions about investments, market trends, and long-term goals. They were trying to get a read on me, figure out if I was fully present, if I was sharp enough to see through whatever they had planned. Throughout the meal, my glass of wine was refilled multiple times, though I was barely taking any sips. Each time I looked down, the glass was fuller. I knew something was off. This wasn't just a birthday dinner. This wasn't just a family trying to rebuild bridges. They were testing me, and they were doing it in a way that made my stomach turn. As dessert was being served, I felt it, the subtle shift in the atmosphere. The wine had taken effect. My mind felt slower, like the fog of confusion was starting to settle in. It wasn't the wine. I knew that much. They were trying to soften me up, to make me compliant. They thought they had me under control. That's when Lucas' voice cut through the fog. "Grandma," he said, his voice cutting through the haze. "We need to talk outside. Right now." I looked up, startled. Lucas was standing at the edge of the room, his eyes wide with urgency. He wasn't acting like a college student who had been enjoying a meal. No, he was tense, and his gaze held that unmistakable look of fear. "Lucas," I began, rising from my seat. "What's going on?" "You're supposed to be." "I'll explain outside," he interrupted, his tone sharp. Rachel jumped in, her voice suddenly far less pleasant than it had been. "Lucas, where are you going? We haven't even had cake yet." "Don't be ridiculous." But Lucas wasn't listening. His face was set with determination. "I need a moment with Grandma," he said, his voice breaking through the tension. I stood up slowly, my body feeling a bit unsteady. The wine had worked its magic. But I wasn't about to be controlled, not by them, not by anyone. I looked at Rachel and Ian, who both wore forced smiles. "It's fine," I said, putting my hand up in a dismissive gesture. "I'll be right back." As I stepped away from the table and moved toward the door with Lucas, I felt the weight of their eyes on me. Ian's smile was tight, and Rachel's expression was a mixture of concern and something darker, something that I couldn't quite place, but had learned to recognize in their kind of people: control. We stepped outside into the cool evening air. The city lights flickered around us, casting long shadows. Lucas pulled me further away from the restaurant, his hand gripping my arm with an urgency that made my heart race. "What's happening, Lucas?" I asked, my voice shaky. "What did they do?" "Grandma, they were going to make you sign documents upstairs," Lucas said, his voice strained. "They wanted to drug you, make you sign over control of Walker Properties. They were trying to do it all night." I froze. The pieces clicked into place. The wine, the large gathering, the subtle pressure, it had all been part of their plan. They weren't just after money, they were after everything I had worked for. They had prepared everything, witnesses, lawyers, the transfer documents. It was all a calculated move. My heart sank. "What now?" "Get in the taxi." "I've already called one for you," Lucas said. "You need to get out of here." "I'll handle it." "You can't go back inside. Not with them planning to make you sign anything." The panic was rising in my chest, but I fought it down. The taxi pulled up, and Lucas opened the door for me. "I'll be okay," he said quietly. "Just get to safety, Grandma. I'll take care of everything." As I climbed into the taxi, I looked back toward the restaurant. Rachel and Ian were still inside, but I knew their facade was about to come crashing down. The game they had played was over, and I would make sure they paid for it. The taxi ride to the hospital felt like the longest journey of my life. I couldn't help but replay the events of the evening in my mind. The laughter, the toasts, the false sense of family togetherness, none of it had been real. It had all been part of their plan. Rachel and Ian had orchestrated the entire thing with such precision. I could hardly believe it. And yet, they had underestimated one thing. They hadn't accounted for Lucas. Lucas had saved me from their trap, but the danger was far from over. I could feel the drugs still working in my system, the haze thickening in my mind. But I couldn't afford to slow down. I had to stay focused. I had to get to the hospital and have my blood tested, make sure the evidence was documented, so that when the time came, I could fight back with everything I had. As the taxi pulled into the emergency room parking lot, I felt a wave of dread wash over me. This wasn't just about medical tests. This was the beginning of a war. My own daughter, the person I had raised, loved, and trusted, had just tried to steal everything I had built. For what? Power? Money? Control? I couldn't process it. Not yet. I had to stay one step ahead, to gather the information I needed to protect myself and my business. "Here we are," the taxi driver said as he stopped in front of the ER entrance. I paid him, stepped out of the car, and made my way inside. The cool, sterile air of the emergency room hit me immediately, but it did little to clear the fog in my mind. My hands were still trembling, and I could feel the effects of the sedative lingering. But I couldn't afford to let it show. Not now. "Ma'am, can I help you?" the nurse at the front desk asked. "I need to get a blood test," I said, my voice steady, though my mind raced. "I believe I've been drugged." The nurse raised an eyebrow, but there was no judgment in her gaze, just a quiet recognition of something serious. "Of course. We'll need to take some details first. Follow me." As she led me to an examination room, I couldn't help but think about what I was doing. This wasn't just about getting medical proof of what had happened. It was about taking control of the situation, about making sure that Rachel and Ian would never be able to get away with this. They had tried to manipulate me, drug me, and steal everything I had worked for. But they hadn't counted on me fighting back. As the nurse took my blood and prepared the necessary samples, my mind returned to Lucas. He had been the one to stop me from making a huge mistake. If it hadn't been for him, I might have been sitting upstairs right now, signing away control of Walker Properties without even realizing it. But Lucas had risked everything to protect me. I thought back to the conversation I had had with him just before we left the restaurant. His face had been full of determination, but I could see the worry behind his eyes. He had warned me about the drug, but he was also worried about what would happen next. I could tell he was scared of what his parents might do, scared of what I might have to do to protect myself. "Everything okay, ma'am?" the nurse asked, snapping me back to reality. "Yes," I said, offering a brief smile. "I'm fine. Just waiting for the results." As I sat in the room, alone with my thoughts, I wondered what Lucas was doing now. Was he back at the restaurant? Had he told anyone what had happened? Would Rachel and Ian try to cover their tracks? And most importantly, what was their next move? It wasn't long before the nurse returned with the results. She handed me a printed report with a somber expression. "We found traces of a sedative in your blood, ma'am," she said, her voice low. "Acepromazine. It's a drug typically used in veterinary settings to sedate animals. It can cause confusion, dizziness, and loss of inhibitions in humans." I stared at the report, the weight of it settling on me. They had really gone that far. They had drugged me with something meant for animals to make me compliant, to force me into signing the documents they had prepared. It was chilling, but it was also exactly the evidence I needed. Now I had something concrete to prove what had happened. I wasn't just a victim of a family betrayal, I was a victim of an organized, calculated plot. "Thank you," I said to the nurse, trying to keep my composure. "I'll be in touch with my lawyer." I left the hospital with the results in hand, a newfound sense of clarity driving me forward. I wasn't just a woman wronged by her family. I was a woman who had spent decades building something valuable, something that deserved to be protected. And I would protect it no matter what. I got back to my house around midnight. The night was quiet, the kind of silence that always felt heavier after a traumatic event. I walked through the door, exhausted but determined. The first thing I did was call Lucas. He answered on the second ring. "Grandma? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said, my voice steady despite the exhaustion. "I have the proof. I've been drugged with acepromazine." The hospital confirmed it. There was a moment of silence before he spoke again, his voice filled with concern. "What now?" "Now we fight back, Lucas. They won't get away with this. I'll make sure of it. I'm with you, Grandma. Whatever you need, I'm here." His words gave me a sense of calm, even as the storm was just beginning. I knew that I couldn't do this alone. I couldn't take down Rachel and Ian without the right support. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, my voice softening. "But we need to act quickly. I've already contacted Marissa. We're going to make sure that every step they've taken is exposed. I'm going to take control of this, Lucas. And we're going to make sure they face the consequences." The next morning, I gathered my documents, everything I had on Walker Properties, all my investments, and the evidence of their scheme. I called Marissa first. "Patricia, what's the plan?" she asked, her voice sharp with focus. "We're going to expose everything. Rachel and Ian have crossed a line, and they need to be held accountable. I have the evidence from the hospital. Acepromazine. The sedative they used to try and manipulate me." I could hear her typing in the background as I spoke. "I'm ready to move forward. I'll start preparing the necessary legal steps. But we need to get the authorities involved. This goes beyond family betrayal. This is fraud, at the very least, and they could be facing criminal charges." "I know," I said, already feeling a sense of control slipping back into my hands. "But this isn't just about criminal charges. This is about making sure that they can never do this again. And I'm going to make sure they don't get away with it. I hung up the phone and looked out my window at the quiet street in front of me. It was strange how peaceful everything seemed on the outside, while my entire world had been turned upside down. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let Rachel and Ian destroy what I had built. Not without a fight. The days that followed were filled with the kind of frantic, controlled chaos that only comes from knowing your entire world is under threat. I had always prided myself on being prepared, on understanding the nuances of business and life. But nothing could have prepared me for the depths of betrayal I was facing. Rachel and Ian hadn't just crossed a line. They had woven a web of lies, manipulation, and deceit, one that I now had to unravel. I spent the next morning in my home office, reviewing every file, every document, and every contract I had accumulated over the years. Walker Properties wasn't just a business to me, it was my legacy, my life's work. And now, it was at risk of being taken away by the very people I had trusted most. I knew I had to be strategic. I couldn't just confront Rachel and Ian directly. I needed to build a case, gather all the evidence I could, and make sure that I had every legal tool at my disposal before I took any action. I started with the documents. My office was organized in a way that allowed me to access everything I needed quickly. The filing cabinets were neatly labeled, the folders clearly marked. I pulled out everything related to my investments, my business dealings with Rachel and Ian, and, most importantly, all of the contracts that Ian had convinced me to sign in the past. I knew there had to be a paper trail, something I could use to tie them to the fraudulent activities they'd been planning. I skimmed through the papers, each one bringing back memories of times I had been hesitant, but had ultimately trusted Ian's business instincts. The cryptocurrency venture that failed. The smoothie franchise that had promised so much but delivered nothing. The luxury car business that vanished without a trace. Each failed venture left a stain on my finances, and I had allowed it to happen because I thought Ian needed my support. But now, as I sat there, staring at the documents, I saw the pattern. Each of these investments had been framed as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a way to grow the business exponentially. And each time, I had been sold on the idea, the promise of great returns, only to watch as my money disappeared into thin air. I wasn't just angry now, I was determined. I knew that Rachel and Ian had been grooming me for something bigger. They had used their previous failures to distract me, to make me more willing to help with their next venture. This time, though, they had gone too far. This wasn't just a bad investment. This was an attempt to steal everything I had worked for. I gathered all the documents related to their schemes and stacked them neatly in front of me. The next step was simple. I needed to connect the dots. And to do that, I had to find out exactly what Rachel and Ian were doing behind the scenes. I called Marissa, my lawyer, and updated her on everything I had uncovered. "Patricia, this is more serious than we thought," she said, her voice tight with concern. "It's clear they've been setting you up for months, maybe longer. This wasn't just about getting you to invest in their schemes. They were using your name to secure loans, to make business deals. It's all starting to add up." I nodded, my fingers nervously tapping on the stack of papers. I found records of their previous failures, but there's something bigger going on here. They've been using my reputation to secure loans and investments, and I have a feeling there's more. Marissa was quiet for a moment before responding. "I agree. We need to dig deeper, Patricia. You're not just dealing with a couple of bad investments. You're dealing with a systemic problem, one that has involved more people than you realize. We need to get a private investigator involved." "I've already contacted one," I said. I'm going to need to find out who else they've been working with. I need to know who else is involved in this. Marissa's voice softened. I understand, but we need to be careful. If you expose too much too quickly, you might alert them. We need to make sure we have everything in place before we move forward. I know, I said. But I can't just sit back and let them get away with this. They've tried to take everything from me. I won't let them. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and strategy sessions. The private investigator I hired, Thomas Green, was quick to act. He was methodical, thorough, and understood the stakes. He began following the money, tracing the connections between Rachel and Ian's failed business ventures and their growing network of collaborators. By Friday afternoon, I had a meeting scheduled with him to go over the initial findings. When he arrived at my office, his expression was grim. We've uncovered something, he said without preamble. Your daughter and son-in-law weren't just running scams in your name. They've been using your assets as collateral for loans. They've also been funneling money through a series of shell companies. I stared at him, stunned. What do you mean, shell companies? They've set up fake businesses, Patricia. Businesses that don't exist on paper. They've used these companies to secure millions in loans, claiming that they have real estate assets backing them. And they've used your name, your properties, to do it. The loans have been funneled through these fake companies, but the real beneficiaries are Rachel and Ian. I felt the blood drain from my face. Are you telling me that they've been taking loans out in my name without my knowledge? Yes, Thomas said. It looks like they've been doing this for at least a year. They've been borrowing money against your properties, securing massive amounts of capital that they've been using to fund their own ventures. And all the while, they've been telling investors that you were on board with it. I sat back in my chair, trying to process what I was hearing. It was worse than I had imagined. Not only had they been planning to drug me and force me to sign away control of Walker Properties, but they had been secretly using my name and assets to leverage huge loans. They had built a house of cards, and they had done it all under my nose. Where are the loans coming from? I asked, my voice shaking with disbelief. They've been working with several lenders, but there's one in particular that seems to be involved in most of these transactions. It's a private equity firm, Radcliffe Capital. They've been funding these fake ventures in exchange for future returns on the investments. Radcliffe Capital, I repeated, the name unfamiliar to me. Who else is involved? Thomas flipped through his notes, then looked back at me. We're still tracing the connections, but it's clear that this firm has ties to some very influential people in the real estate world. People who would have no problem helping Rachel and Ian cover their tracks. I felt a pit form in my stomach. I wasn't just dealing with Rachel and Ian anymore. This had turned into something far bigger, something far more dangerous. We need to shut this down, Thomas, I said, my voice hardening. I won't let them get away with it. Thomas nodded. We're already putting together the case. But we need to move fast. If we expose too much, we could alert the wrong people. We need to keep a low profile while we finish our investigation. That night, I sat alone in my office, staring at the papers spread out before me. The weight of the situation was almost too much to bear, but I knew what I had to do. This wasn't just about protecting my business. It was about protecting everything I had built, everything that was mine by right. Rachel and Ian had made their move, but now it was my turn. The weight of what I was up against was beginning to feel suffocating. The web of lies Rachel and Ian had woven was tangled deeper than I had imagined, and I was standing at the center of it all. Every new revelation, every new piece of evidence, only served to strengthen my resolve. But it also made it clear that the stakes were higher than I had initially realized. The next morning, I met with Thomas at a small cafe in the city. I needed a neutral space, one where we could discuss the findings without the prying eyes of anyone involved in this scheme. I had learned the hard way that trust was a fragile thing now, especially when it came to family. Rachel and Ian had betrayed me on a scale I couldn't have fathomed, and it seemed like everyone involved was willing to turn a blind eye as long as the money kept flowing. "I've got the final report," Thomas said, sliding a folder across the table to me. His face was tight, but I could see the determination behind his eyes. He wasn't just doing this for money or a job, he was doing it because he understood what was at stake. "We've traced the money and the people behind Radcliffe Capital. This is bigger than your daughter and son-in-law." I took a deep breath and opened the folder, my fingers trembling. I had seen the preliminary findings, but this was the final piece of the puzzle. Thomas had managed to track down not only the connections between Rachel, Ian, and Radcliffe Capital, but also the network of accomplices they had involved. There were names: lawyers, financiers, and business associates, people who had helped them cover their tracks, people who had been complicit in this fraudulent scheme. "Tell me what we're dealing with," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. I had to remain calm. I had to think clearly. Thomas nodded. "Radcliffe Capital is a private equity firm, but it's not like any other firm. It's essentially a front for a series of high-risk investments. They've been funding these shady ventures by using real estate as collateral, and it looks like they've done it before with other clients. Rachel and Ian were just one of many." I leaned back, processing the information. So they've been running this kind of scam for years, and Rachel and Ian got involved because they saw an opportunity. "That's right," Thomas confirmed. "But here's where it gets complicated. Radcliffe has connections to people in the real estate world who know how to manipulate the system. They've been helping your daughter and son-in-law secure loans based on properties that aren't really theirs. And now they're using the debt they've accumulated to get more investments, more money, and more control over assets they never owned." I swallowed hard. "And they've been using my name to do it." "Yes. They've been forging your signature on documents, using your properties as collateral for these loans, and securing investors who thought you were in on it." I stared at the report in front of me, the words feeling like they were sinking deeper than I wanted to admit. They had used my name, my reputation, to leverage millions of dollars. And for what? To line their pockets? To create a facade of success that didn't exist? "I won't let this go," I said, my voice suddenly cold. "They've tried to destroy everything I've worked for, and I won't stand for it." Thomas leaned forward. "Patricia, we have to move quickly. If we go public with this, we risk exposing ourselves to some very powerful people, people who might not hesitate to silence us. We need to hit them where it hurts, without giving them time to regroup." I nodded, my mind already working through the next steps. We need to expose the fraud, but we need to do it in a way that doesn't put us at risk. We can't let them cover this up again. That afternoon, I called Marissa to update her on everything I had learned. As we spoke, I felt the weight of the situation growing heavier, but I also felt something else, a sense of clarity. I was no longer just reacting. I was in control. The pieces had fallen into place, and I was ready to take action. "Marissa," I began, "we have everything we need to bring them down. Thomas has traced the money. We have proof of the loans they secured using my name. We have enough to expose the entire scheme." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. "This is bigger than we thought," Marissa said slowly. "We're not just talking about financial fraud. We're talking about conspiracy, money laundering, and possibly even racketeering. If we go public, we're going to need more than just the evidence we've gathered. We're going to need allies. People who can protect us. I clenched my jaw, the weight of her words sinking in. I know. But we can't just let this go on. Not when they're using my name to ruin everything I've built. We'll need to start with the authorities. The police, the district attorney. And we'll need to make sure everything is airtight before we go to the media. I sighed, feeling the exhaustion in my bones. I'm ready. I've waited too long to take this fight to the next level. Rachel and Ian have made their move. Now it's time for me to make mine. The following week was a whirlwind. Marissa and I worked tirelessly, coordinating with Thomas to ensure we had all the evidence we needed to take down Rachel and Ian. We contacted the police, provided them with the full investigation, and made sure they understood the scale of what had happened. By the time we had gathered everything, I knew there was no turning back. Rachel and Ian had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I would make sure that they faced the consequences of their actions, no matter what it took. Then came the day of reckoning. It started with the knock on my door. The police had arrived. I opened the door to find two detectives standing in front of me, their expressions serious. Mrs. Walker, we need to speak with you about an ongoing investigation. We've received information that your daughter and son-in-law have been involved in fraudulent activities related to your business, the lead detective said, his voice steady but filled with authority. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. I know. And I've already provided all the evidence you'll need. The detective stepped inside, and I knew, without a doubt, that this was only the beginning. The fight wasn't over, but I had made sure I was prepared for whatever came next. As the detectives began their investigation, I made one final call to Lucas. "Grandma, I'm so proud of you," Lucas said when he answered the phone. "You did it. You're going to win this." "Not yet, sweetheart," I said, my voice firm. "This is just the first step. But we're going to make sure they never do this again." I hung up the phone, standing tall and strong. The battle was far from over, but I was no longer the woman they had tried to manipulate. I was in control now, and I wasn't going to let anyone take what was rightfully mine. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal meetings, police investigations, and countless phone calls. The truth was out now, and the wheels of justice had begun to turn. But as much as I had hoped that everything would be resolved quickly, I knew it wasn't going to be that simple. Rachel and Ian were still out there, still trying to salvage what they could from the wreckage they had caused. And I wasn't about to let them walk away unscathed. The first thing I did was gather my strength. I wasn't just dealing with a family betrayal anymore. I was dealing with a conspiracy, a multi-layered scheme that had gone on for far too long. Rachel and Ian hadn't just tried to steal my business. They had involved other people, some of them very dangerous. The more we dug, the more I realized that this wasn't just a story of personal betrayal. It was a story of manipulation, of power-hungry people who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. But I wasn't going to let them succeed. The police had done their part. The evidence we provided was irrefutable: documents, recordings, and bank statements that tied Rachel and Ian directly to Radcliffe Capital and the fraudulent loans. But even as the authorities closed in on them, I knew that there was one final step left: facing them. I hadn't seen Rachel or Ian since that night at Riverside Grill, and I wasn't sure I was ready to face them again. But I had to. They had stolen from me, betrayed me, and almost destroyed everything I had worked for. I couldn't let them think they had won. The confrontation was set for late in the afternoon. I'd been waiting for weeks for the moment when everything would come to a head. And now, as I stood in front of the mirror, I made sure I was ready. My navy blue dress was still the same, simple, dignified, and sharp. I wasn't going to let them see any fear in me. I had a legacy to protect. I had a future to fight for. When I arrived at the police station, the air was thick with tension. Rachel and Ian had been summoned to the station for questioning. I knew they had been given a chance to make their case, to spin their story, but there was no escaping the truth now. The detective in charge, Officer Daniels, had made it clear that they were facing serious charges. I was led into an interrogation room where Rachel and Ian sat, their eyes darting nervously around the room. They were trying to maintain their composure, but I could see through their facades. They knew this was the end of the line for them. "Mom, please," Rachel said, her voice cracking as I entered the room. "You have to understand. We were just trying to build something. We didn't mean for it to go this far." I stared at her, her words falling flat in my ears. "You didn't mean for it to go this far? You poisoned me, Rachel. You manipulated me, used my name to steal from me, and you tried to force me into signing over everything I've worked for. Don't try to justify what you've done." Ian shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding my gaze. "Patricia, we were under a lot of pressure. You don't understand how hard things have been for us." "I don't understand?" I said, my voice cold. "I've worked my entire life to build Walker Properties. I've spent decades getting to this point. And instead of supporting me, you two tried to take it all away. For money. For control." Rachel's face crumpled, but there was no remorse in her eyes, just guilt and anger. "It wasn't like that, Mom. We were just trying to give you a future. You didn't understand how quickly the world was changing. You're stuck in the past. And we were just trying to make things work." "You were trying to take what wasn't yours," I shot back. "I don't care about your excuses anymore, Rachel. You and Ian tried to ruin me. You tried to use me to fund your schemes, and now you're going to face the consequences." Rachel looked away, and for the first time, I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't expected: regret. But it was too late for that. She had crossed a line, and now she had to pay for it. The detectives had gathered enough evidence to move forward with the charges. As the conversation turned to the formalities, charges of fraud, conspiracy, and theft, I couldn't help but feel a sense of cold satisfaction. Rachel and Ian would face the full extent of the law for what they had done. But even that wasn't enough for me. I knew they had to face the consequences in every way, not just legally, but personally. As the police prepared to take them away for further questioning, Rachel looked at me one last time. "I never wanted it to come to this, Mom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I held her gaze for a moment. "You made your choices, Rachel. You and Ian both did. And now you have to live with them." The next few months were a blur. The trial moved forward, and the weight of everything they had done slowly became clearer. It wasn't just the financial damage they had caused, it was the betrayal of everything I had built with my own two hands. It was the broken trust, the shattered family bond. But I couldn't focus on that now. I had to keep moving forward, for my sake and for Lucas. He had stood by me through all of this, and now it was time to make sure that he understood that honesty, hard work, and integrity mattered more than anything else. The court proceedings were long, and the legal battles dragged on, but the outcome was clear from the start. Rachel and Ian were found guilty of multiple charges, including conspiracy, fraud, and money laundering. They were both sentenced to lengthy prison terms, their lives effectively destroyed by their own greed and deception. And yet, as I watched them led away in handcuffs, I felt no satisfaction. I didn't feel joy in their downfall. What I felt was relief that they could no longer harm anyone else, relief that my business, my legacy, was safe. The true victory wasn't in the legal outcome. The true victory came in the quiet moments afterward, when I saw Lucas sitting across from me, his face filled with hope. "Grandma," he said one evening as we reviewed some of the documents for Walker Properties, "I want you to know that you've taught me everything I need to know. You built something real, something honest. And that's what I want to do too." I smiled at him, my heart swelling with pride. "You already have, Lucas. You've proved yourself when it mattered most. And now, you're going to help me build something even stronger." Together, we spent the evening making plans for the future, ensuring that Walker Properties would continue to thrive under honest leadership. I realized then that, despite everything I had lost, I had something much more important: my integrity, my work ethic, and my family. Rachel and Ian had tried to take everything from me, but in the end, they had only given me more. They had shown me just how far I was willing to go to protect what mattered. And I would make sure that Lucas carried that legacy forward, not just in business, but in life. As the story of betrayal and justice comes to a close, I want to take a moment to thank you for joining me on this journey. It's a reminder that no matter what life throws at you, standing firm in your values and fighting for what's right will always prevail. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on more incredible stories like this. Your support means the world, and we appreciate every one of you who's been a part of this community. Thank you for watching, and remember, your best chapters are still ahead.